Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the
So after Jack regained his confidence at the end of the last episode, he and Ashi dedicated their time to go looking for his missing sword, for it is the only known weapon in existence with the capability of defeating the pure manifestation of evil that is Aku. Episode 98 covers just that, as the two go through their own separate turn of events in order to recover his lost sword once again. There are quite the number of interesting things that this episode presents us with, from the flashback to the army to the exploration of Jack's inner self. And while I found myself to be more invested in the last episode's chain of events than this one specifically, it still has a lot going for it. The episode begins with a flashback of all things, telling the story of how Aku destroyed the very last time portal in existence to prevent Jack from getting back to the past. In it, Jack discovers the portal and manages to throw himself in, but Aku pulls him out of it just in time to prevent him from saving his people from Aku's tyranny. I really like this as an introduction to the episode, as it gives further background to the past questions that we've had ever since the first episode where Scaramouche noticed Jack lost his sword, and it begins to set up the rest of this episode in particular. After Aku destroys the time portal, he leaves Jack to fight demonic versions of the adorable baby goats that were following up to the mountaintop, to which Jack ends up brutally murdering by mistake after he lets his anger take control of him. This moment when Jack realizes he killed those adorable little goats just hits home for me because it gives a legitimate reason as to why he would lose his sword. And his way for that matter. Like, killing the daughters of Aku is fine by me because at least he gave them a choice, but the fact that he took the lives of those defenseless baby goats just strikes me in a way that I cannot explain. I'm one of those people who just hate seeing animals die on screen, so bear with me here. He also expresses just how overcome with despair he is because he can't believe he's done such a thing. And as a result, he loses his sword because it no longer sees him as worthy of wielding such a divine blade. That's where the flashback ends off, so all in all, I'd say it was a pretty good start to the episode, albeit a bit brutal. Everything picks back up with Jack and Ashi going to the same spot to look for Jack's sword, though they ultimately cannot find it, further proving Jack's theory that it was the sword who chose to leave him rather than it just being an accident. I really like this idea because it shows that even a character as noble and humble as Jack still has flaws. He's not perfect, he just let his anger get the better of him, as I'm sure a lot of us have done in the past. It makes him more relatable, more human, because he's not the unattainable, idealized model that everyone strives to be. The rest of the episode goes back to telling us two parallel stories, one focusing on Jack and finding his way back to his former glory, and the other surrounding Ashi's attempts to defend him from the incoming danger that's drawing very close. Let's start with Ashi's side of the story, as it's the more action-packed side of this sequence of events. While Jack is currently lost in his subconscious, Ashi notices an army approaching from the distance that is planning on marching up the mountain to kill the samurai. So she decides to take matters into her own hands and put a stop to them all by herself. Now, I was already a fan of Ashi before this episode, as she sold me on her character back during the 5th episode of the season, but this just further reinforces the admiration I have towards her. This scene either makes Ashi one of the greatest fighters to ever live, or these guys have got to be the most incompetent band of soldiers to have ever existed. Though I'm sure the most likely compromise here is that both are true. This is one of the coolest action scenes this season has had so far. It's bloody and violent, and that's exactly how I like it. She single-handedly takes down this entire group of thugs by herself. Like, how awesome is that? However, her real shining moment is when she confronts her mother at the top of the mountain, who's come to kill the samurai herself since none of her daughters could succeed in doing so. This is probably my favorite moment in the entire episode because it's just great to see Ashi take down the person responsible for poisoning her mind into thinking that Jack was the source of all the world's problems, and nothing's better than seeing a character give some payback to those who brought them down. After some hand-to-hand combat and an arrow through the stomach, Ashi manages to kill her mother and send her off the cliff to her death, thus relieving Ashi of the burden that she had been living with for quite some time. Now, as for Jack, he finds himself lost deep within his subconscious mind, where he journeys across a mysterious river to find a monk waiting for him. Can I just take a moment to appreciate the music that plays during Jack's travel into the depths of his mind? It's just so relaxing how it puts me in an almost dreamlike state, and if it were to have kept playing for a few more minutes, I probably would have fallen asleep before the end of the episode. It's very ambient. This is also another opportunity taken by the animators to wow us with some inspiring backgrounds and eloquent colors that really set up the mood. Jack then proceeds to go through the process of making tea, a sequence that kept my eyes glued to the screen purely for how tranquil it is. Again, the sheer amount of serenity that is created while Jack mixes hot water and tea leaves is breathtaking if you want my honest opinion. I should also mention that I adore the contrast between these events here and the previous ones I had mentioned with Ashi, because it balances the intense, bloody battle shots with the soothing atmosphere of Jack making tea. This really emphasizes the contrast between the two characters, because while Ashi is busy taking the lives of what looks like 1,000,000 alien soldiers, Jack is taking his time practicing the honorable customs that he was born and raised with. We haven't really seen a side quite like this with Ashi yet, likely a result of the fact that she was raised with a much different set of practices and strategies during her time with her mother. Unlike Jack, who up until the confrontation with the daughters never managed to take a human's life, Ashi doesn't seem to have a problem with it whatsoever, likely an indication that she lacks guilt for those who oppose her. I like that contrast because it provides for a more interesting dynamic between the two with their different fighting styles and belief systems. Jack proceeds to make tea, which is terrible according to the monk because it lacks the same balance that he used to have back before he lost his sword. His anger has consumed him, and the only way Jack could restore himself was to confront it head on, which is exactly what he does. Unfortunately, this is where my biggest issue with this episode actually comes into play. Maybe it's just me, but I felt that this discussion that he has with his conscience was just a little too rushed. I don't know, it just felt like it was resolved a bit too quickly considering the sheer amount of darkness and despair that Jack was going through not too long ago. But hey, I'm glad the problem was resolved regardless. His restoration allows the gods to bestow his sword upon him as well as his former iconic robes that he used to wear, and he gets a shave and a haircut at no extra charge. Not gonna lie, I'm gonna miss the beard though. With that, Jack awakens from his dormant state and finds Ashi so that the two of them can finally go after the Master of Masters himself. All in all, I found this episode to be pretty decent, with the battle between Ashi and her mother to be the highlight of the episode for me. Jack's journey to clear his mind and bring balance to his lifestyle was a close second though, so I would say that the second half of this episode was better than the first. That's not to say the first half of this episode was bad or anything, of course it wasn't, but it took me some time before I was really enticed by everything going on. However, now that that's said and done, there's only one thing left for them to do, and I can hardly wait.
Watch out. Watch out.